have a very special invited speaker today, and I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Antonio Silva to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Susan. So my name is Antonio José Bassalá da Silva. I go by Tom Zé, and I'm an assistant professor with the Center for Latin American Studies. And it's with great pleasure. We're really excited to introduce our invited speaker, Gabriel, Dr. Gabriel Nascimento dos Santos. Gabriel Nascimento dos Santos is a professor at the Federal University of Southern Bahia in Brazil. He earned his PhD in linguistics at USP, Universidade de São Paulo, and he's the author of the book, Linguistic Racism, the Underlying Relationship Between Language and Racism. Today, he's discussing linguistic racism across colonial borders and the case of Brazilian Portuguese versus Pretoguese, or Pretoguese in English. Really excited about that. So for the audience, if you have any questions for Gabriel, we'll have some time at the end of the talk, 15 to 20 minutes for questions and Q&A and discussion. And Gabriel, it's a pleasure to have you, if not in person, the way we want it to be, at least this time virtually, next time in person, and hopefully for longer. So welcome, and thank you for sharing your amazing work with us. So you have the floor now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tanzé, for those moments that we need, not only virtual meetings, so we have to overcome these moments, bad moments we are surviving, specifically. Hi, Tucson. I've been flying through Tucson. I think it was a flight I had to take from some city to another city. So I was so excited and thrilled that I could travel to Tucson, but it was not possible. But probably we can plan another time that I can go to the US. I'm so happy because at this moment we are talking about issues specifically, but that we have colleagues from the US that you can share our concerns. And of course, I'm here with friends and colleagues, and I'm so happy because of that. So I'm going to talk about linguistic racism and across colonial borders, the case of Brazilian Portuguese versus Pretoguese. Of course, I am departing from some experiences. I'm not departing from nowhere. I'm departing from some experiences. First of all, my university, I'm an assistant professor too at Federal University of Southern Bahia, which is located in 3 cities: Porto Seguro, Itabuna, where I am now, and Teixeira de Freitas. And this is a new established university that was founded by former President Dilma Rousseff, and it has some community colleges that I cannot translate like community college, but we have linked schools that are schools of our government, state governments, that serve as a place for our classes, our off campus. So my university seeks to include Black and Indigenous students. So we have affirmative actions that devote 85% vacancies, reserved vacancies for Black and quotas for Black and Indigenous students. And of course, I'm departing from discussions that we are taking. So this take is coming from our discussions with the within the BRICS group, with the project of vulnerability and sociolinguistic studies and linguistic citizenship, which is hosted by the the Center for Multilingualism and Diversity Research from the University of the Western Cape, South Africa. So it's the discussion we're doing, and more we having creating and framing a concept on linguistic citizenship through the lens of everybody who are departing from their own position. So my position is to speak about linguistic racism, but we also have Gabriela Veronelli speaking by coloniality of language, Limbario Trindade Menezes de Souza, who's one of our senior scholars, so he's not responsible for any issue specifically, but we have Chris Stroud, Professor Christopher Stroud, and Professor Quentin Williams. Professor Chris is a senior scholar, and Professor Quentin Williams is discussing linguistic vulnerability about Africa in South Africa. And we have, of course, many scholars from Brazil, Juliana Martins, who's speaking about internationalization, Tanya Rezende, who's speaking about social linguistics in Brazil through the lens of the rainforests and our deities and divination from the forests in Brazil. And of course, we have a range of discussions. So this discussion I'm going to present derives from our discussions in this think tank group. I'm trying to, okay. So in Brazil specifically, as it's the context of my context and Professor Tom Zé too. So our context is that we are from a nation where we are only 130 years after the abolition, so a bit more, but 130 years after the abolition, that we have and suffer from what comes to be originated by slavery and enslavement in Brazil. I am speaking about a country that is made up by 52 identified Black and Indigenous populations. So 52% identify Black, not Indigenous. It's wrong here. The data is wrong, but this data is wrong. But specifically, we're departing from a nation where the so-called non-national languages, which would be otherized in South Africa or in Angola or in some countries from Africa, where national languages are languages that they originated from ancient peoples. But now I'm speaking about Brazil, where we share the vision of monolingualism. That's not existing, of course, in Brazil, where we have more than 195% of indigenous languages. And of course, I define linguistic racism from my own earlier described position as the racialization in language. My standpoint bears that linguistic acts are those to be designed by racism, such as, for example, it can be said like the words proffered when a racist, someone who's racist calls somebody with N-words. What a term, I'm using N-words, but in Brazil, as Professor José knows, as you know, we don't have this kind of same situation of N-words as it's in the US, because here we had a reconceptualization on the way we use those racist words. We signify those words into our own position. So that's not the same way someone who's racist says. It depends on the context you are, and specifically N-words. I'm speaking about N-words to talk to you, but what a term racism through language. But also we have the words and expressions that implicitly are used in a language that bear a history of racialization in it. What I call racism in language And of course, I have example for this as well, because some words are implicit to the way we use the language. Then they aren't N words, but they are implicit. Sometimes, like with the origins or the way it's used during slavery or during the colonial times. And of course, it stems from the position. For example, it's the case of Negro in Brazil, that we who consider, who identify Black or brown, we say of ourselves like negro, which is not negro in English, but Black. But this word specifically is used within many situations where people can use like something that's negatively said, like you are in the Negro way. You can use this. So that's so hard to translate some idioms or expressions into English. So I'm trying an attempt to do it, but these are not in words, but it's what we can shape. The shape we can look at, like some words that are implicitly used in a language, that they bear the history of racialization. So they can show us that in Brazil we had a system of horror, and of course this horror represented two bad times in terms of what we suffer nowadays. So it's implicated by, of course, the way in language it can have, it can portray the past that we had. So third, the acts that go beyond racism. And of course, we are speaking now about linguistic anthropology, studies that conceive of racial linguistics and the racial linguistic perspective, educational standpoints that you can see how it behaves, for example, about how Black children are not included, or what they suffer from those systems and inequalities that we see implicated or imposed on Black communities. So people being supposed to not be able to do something because of their racial profile, it's the right example to me that we have this link to how we can think this as linguistic racism and too. So it's also the link that I have my work from what comes to be discussed in the US in terms of racial linguistics or the racial linguistic perspective. So I'm drawing on many aspects, of course, but I'm also drawing on to concepts and conceptualization that are very, very important to my work. And they are language as invention, that Marconi and Pennycook describe as the way we not only manipulate, but we use languages like meta-discursive regimes, and the way we can look at how we can see languages as units. So inventions say that we are always talking about inventions that sometimes we take into account that they are real facts. And when inventions, we have how to obscure the way they produce or they generate some masks, what Fanon calls the zone of being, the zone of non-being. For Fanon, in his criticism and that he raises against humanism, and white people live in a zone of being. Zone of being is the way, is the creation of humanism and to design the way you exist in a modern society. And stemming from slavery, where you don't have ancestors that should survive or should struggle for survival. So, of course, he's speaking about a zone of non-being, to speak about a zone of non-being where we dwell, so where we have to deal with problems concerning our racial profile. What means sometimes that you are in a super racialized society, not a super diversity context as in the global north, where sometimes we have discussions about super diversity. Of course, it's legitimate, but I'm not critiquing this to not be legitimate. But of course, we are speaking about super racialized communities or countries where a zone of non-being is the way million Brazilians have to dwell in, have to live in Brazil. For example, most of people in jails in Brazil are blacks, and of course we have incarceration in Brazil is a huge problem of how we are facing racism, and we are not facing at all. And of course, this is a broader example of how we can talk about zone of non-being. But I could say that in education we have high rates of poverty and illiteracy concerning our literacy here should be obscured too, because I'm speaking here from the point of scholarly reading, and that's so narrow to look at how people can read. Of course, you have the ethnography of texts, and this is not to speak but illiterate in the way that our labor market and the way governments look at this. And of course, this is being originated from the way we have to speak about white invention of African traditions, because also languages are inventions. Languages in Africa are, from the standpoint of Europeans, are inventions in the way that ancient people had their customs and languages that from now on counted as units. So I'm here drawing on Mujimbi to say that we should sometimes disinvent Africa and Africans, so that you can handle the way we are in the Black diaspora in Brazil or in the US, to treat this way. So language planning was also framed by European scholars, as Marconi Macheri put. And of course, I'm framing here to speak about linguistic racism and a concept that's language as a zone, an invented zone, of course, of non-being for Black-speak communities. And I decided to take this and to work with this to talk about briefly about colonial borders, because to me it's very important that we can see our livelihood in terms of colonial borders, because sometimes we feel comfortable and confident with this kind of modernity where we are, and sometimes we don't see we have a colonial past. And of course, this affects differently. Unlike the US, we have some other faces, but you have many faces of how we can be strived. So Mignolo points to the way we are always linked to colonial borders, what he sees as border thinking. So the way we are always thinking on the border, or on edge, or we should think what we could say in Portuguese, critical border thinking, because border thinking in Portuguese implies some other contexts. and do so also urge transmodernity as a rereading of modernity from colonial borders, the way we can reread modernity. And modernity, of course, is reread when we are handling the way some ancient people thought of the colonizers. And of course, for example, it's the way indigenous communities in Brazil during the invasion, where they saw invaders and colonizers. I don't like to say settlers because in English, some people will use settlers, but settlers, they're not settlers, they're colonizers, not colonists, but colonizers. But colonizers who, like some other people arriving, not like who were trying to invade and kill everyone, or have a dominance over the peoples in the country or in the region of the territory. So Enzaldua pioneered, while speaking from her own positions in the motherlands. Of course, it's very influential to my work, the way Enzaldua works when she says that she's speaking about the way she's framed to, she's speaking from English from her own position as a scholar, about her mouth and the way she can speak English and Spanish as well. So going here, let's check my time. Okay. So I'm going now to address Brazilian Portuguese, because to me, this is very, very important that we can go back to the way it was formed. But not only, as we know, here we have some pictures that I brought from my own community. So this is a gincana. Professor Anton Zé knows what is a gincana, but a gincana is a game that eventually can happen when schools have small towns or villages where you can join the community to have some actions, such as that they can help poorest ones, that they can act or have role plays like using creativity, for example. So this is very interesting that I'm using this to talk about Brazilian Portuguese, because I was using this slide presentation from other presentations, so I'm using this model, and I decided to not remove this, because this is very important to me. So not controlled. What about the hypothesis about Brazilian Portuguese, how it was formed? First of all, that it was the transmission of Portuguese was not controlled by regular. I could say regular. That's some word. That's a word that's very used in the U.S. like regular milk, but of course it was not controlled by official policies by Portuguese governments back then. But of course, I'm speaking about this, but I don't totally disagree, but I don't totally agree with this. So secondly, it's believed that Pedin have not turned into creoles in Brazil. So it's a discussion that many Americans, many people from the US, from the University of Pennsylvania, for example, and many scholars from the US, worked in Brazil to analyze whether we had creoles or not, through the lens that we had the same context as it was in the Caribbean. But of course, Brazilian linguistics denied the existence of pidgin because, as they say, samples of language spoken in urban cities in Brazil served from some Brazilian linguists to urge a national identity for our language which is the Brazilian Portuguese. I would say that, I don't know if you agree with me, so of course it's not the way here, it's to agree or disagree, it's for discussions. But sometimes I think it comes from our colonial borders that linguistics in Brazil attempts to frame a national identity, because it's the way it had to struggle for civil rights. That's a word that's not well known in Portuguese, because here we could say human rights, not civil rights. But I say civil rights because of the implementation of the Constitution, and it was post dictatorship in Brazil. But let me go here to talk more about this. Let me raise criticism more, to talk about more about this, that until more recently, little attention has been devoted to the way Africans also contributed to the way both are not the same language, Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese. So what I'm saying this, because even creolists who worked for analyzing how we could engage in creoles or not, they were not going to contribute to the way this language is not the same language spoken in Portugal, thanks to African contributions. And of course, some linguists do it, but in part because we do not recognize our multilingualism in Brazil as a result of centuries of monolingualism imposed on Africans and indigenous communities by European settlers. I'm using settlers because it was from a paper I'm writing, and I know that's settler, not colonizer. But let me go here. I wanna get to explicate or to bring some context that we have to analyze from experiences you have in the US. First of all, monoglossic ideologies. It's monoglossic, but my corrector goes as it goes. Monoglossic ideologies that combine the way we have framed ideologies of power, of colonial power, working for saying what's right, what is not, in language ideologies, because language ideologies are about perceptions and conceptualizations that emerge from colonial times and contexts, but also inventions that we have about language. And of course, we should work about language ideologies like the US, that you work about language ideologies in a context that you have about inequalities. But for example, I would bring a criticism over the way Europeans do it, because sometimes they are used to go to African countries to analyze how some aspects are realized and how some aspects are they exist. And in fact, this is so bad to the extent that it's sometimes colonizing the view on how it's like in Europe, they don't have some problems on their rightness. So I'm here different the US from Europe in the context of language ideologies or the concept of sociolinguistic studies. But Cato and Martins in Brazil seem to endorse the thesis of a variation between Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese as if they were the same unit. In other words, such as Tarallo, the central analysis argues that the differences between both languages made it to be necessary the writing of grammars in Brazil. So it's, if you have to write grammars in Brazil, it's not the same language. So as opposed in the variation hypothesis. Going more on this, we have the first grammar that was published in 1697 in Bahia, in Lisboa about the language spoken in Bahia. I'm going to translate it into English, but it's not so good, my translation. The art of the language of Angola, which by Padre Pedro Dias, priest Pedro Dias, and it widely calls into question the presence of Bento speakers from Angola in Salvador, because this was the context for the priest to write a grammar, because it was a huge population where he could look at. So let me go here. So looking deeper, this question, oh my God, is there a unique Brazilian Portuguese? So this question is very good, because Brazil is not a country. Brazil is a continent. Like some large countries in the world, we have contexts of a continent. So it's we are trying to attack the hypothesis of prescriptivists who draw on the way we should speak like Portuguese ancestors, but we're doing the same way, because it's the way we using the way of a unique Brazilian Portuguese. So the sentiment of monolingualism is also centered by the way sociolinguistics looks at Brazilian Portuguese in Brazil. So looking deeper, this sentiment opposes the real linguistic practices in the territory, opposes these practices where over 150 indigenous languages existing. I said 190 because it's wrong, this number. My number now is correct. So African linguistic practices have been for so long observed as a problem in Brazilian history, as does Silva Neto, who's a grammar writer, when he critiqued the Portuguese of Black communities. He's an openly racist scholar, so I could say this. I could say openly because some scholars do not say they racist, or do not say they hate, or this is so bad the way African communities speak Portuguese, but he does it openly. So he says that the history of Portuguese language has not originated Creole, but a semi-Creole, that what can be understood as primitive speaking. So in these words, it's not my words, okay? So Brazilian Portuguese can also be revisited by Lucas's words that argue to not be possible that a Creole have existed in Brazil, but some examples of situated Paganization or creolization, and most scholars who appear to frame a much accepted version of this discussion in Brazil believe that non-standard structures of European Portuguese disappoint those who regard that creolization formed Brazilian Portuguese because some specific events of variation in which Brazilian Creoles could be characterized were also found in European Portuguese. So it's the case of Naro and Cherry who point this. And as such, if one examines the erasure of S, or the erosion of S, in the following noun phrase in Brazilian Portuguese, as menina. In Portuguese, we don't say as meninas, the girls, but as menina. So the final S is not pronounced. And early creolists said that it's something that comes from the way Bantu languages were used in Bahia, and the way it originated a Creole. So it's a kind of creole in Portuguese. And the central analysis, for example, for some scholars I forgot his name, Tarallo and Guy. It's the case of analyzing how we could say of a creolization in Portuguese. But to deny the existence or to go backward, so in Brazilian Portuguese, they analyze two examples. One of them is the subject and verb eles dirige that exists in Portugal, to the way they can use, they have the erasure of, they don't pronounce this final M, dirigem. And as menina, they say it's the same case that as meninas, that's an NP that we can say of this, like if they hypothesize that it's coming from a Creole, we can, of course, hypothesize that it's coming from a Creole developed out from African languages. Okay, I'm going and going. So we need more evidence to conclude that this erasure of the final S soon after the phrase as menina results from naturalization, like in the erosion of M in the sentence eles dirige, they drive, because it's not an evidence, it's a comparison. We should have more evidence. So my problem here is not to talk about, to contend with those trends in linguistics specifically, and not to assume creoles existed. Creoles existed in terms of what we believe in our cognitive sense of creoles, but that legitimacy is a racist lens to see our national identity and in language. So we cannot think of languages like this. So now I'm going to speak about Pretoguese to analyze this from my final words that developed out from many languages the enslaved Africans brought during the centuries of colonial times. Pretoguese is still a hypothesis towards many directions, including embodied Portuguese. I'm calling this embodied Pretoguese because I'm doing with this. I'm dealing with this because I need to know. As you know, we don't have languages only in our speaking, but also in our bodies. I'm speaking English with my body now. Of course, I can be contrasted in terms of my speaking and the way I'm framing here, some aspects of British and American English, but mostly African and Jamaican and Brazilian, not because I'm hearing or I have inputs from Africa or from Jamaica, but because it's embodied in me. So what I seek to find out in this presentation, what Gonzalez, our Black anthropologist, Lélia Gonzalez, pioneered as the use of Pretoguese to name the Portuguese spoken by Afro-Brazilian communities. So she says that too ironic that they criticize us when we say Flamengo. They call us them, and also say we speak wrong. They ignore that if one replaces R with RL, it is a mark from an African language in which L doesn't exist. L doesn't exist. Finally, who's them? At the same time, they think the greatest point in Brazilian vernacular is the erasure of that R in infinitive endings, like se replacing você or tá, and so on. Black anthropologist Lélia Gonzalez is analyzing the way Black communities usually speak that way. So it's not a case of go back to their origins or to attempt to look at how they can be legitimate or what are the legitimacy. So it's the way we can, she's not looking at this. So I'm here framing, of course, the concept of Pretoguese as the Black technology of speaking Brazilian Portuguese. So I have here Brazilian Portuguese does exist. I don't know exactly about one Brazilian Portuguese, creolized Portuguese. The process is on. Of course, the process is on, even in white countries, but we in linguistics only speak about creolization in Black and non-white countries. Look at that. But as you know, Portuguese originates from this context of the Black technology. It's not the way we have a norm, but a Black technology. So now I want to share with you some data I collected briefly from my students about perception, and I'm using here, I'm revolving around the language ideologies and linguistic differentiation and perceptions coming from Woolard, Crosby, and Irvine and Gall. So I used to work with the students that they should go to the local communities to look at about the multiplicity and frequency of uses of some words that I hypothesized, I assume that's disappearing in Southern Bahia. Of course, it's not about only African roots and how African groups in Bahia or in Brazil speak some expressions that I as a linguist, I don't see spoken by white communities. For example, what I call white communities in Brazil, white middle class neighborhood where 98% of population is made up by white people. So Henka, like crowd, a group of things. Cada pá de grito, like too much yelling. La ele, like gafarbate. La ele doido. Or para ser, for example, like something or someone weird. As menina, like the girl, it's bad to say that in English, the girls. Sônia é boa, otherwise in São Paulo, or in contrast, we have a Sônia. The Sônia is a good person. The Sônia, not Sônia, like it is in English. Madonna, like a nap. Madonna comes from Madorra, Portuguese word, Madorra. Para semana, next week, we could say in Portuguese, semana que vem, here's para semana. Wow, eita pega, xoxo, goró, like some drinks that you can say about goró is not every drink, every beverage, but goró is a goró. Goró is what you drink, like pinga, pilunga, like stick. Okay, let me go to talk about my students. So Gisele, her perception on the erasure phenomenon in Southern Bahia, she analyzed first that that course was a reason for her to remember her childhood. And she realized many words for most of people, especially youth. Laele, what means gafarbate, she sees as something that she can see exclusively used in Bahia. Laele continues to be used among my friends, so it's not being raised. So it has double sense, and people understand when I speak Laele as gafarbate. So it's not Gisele, it's Renatinha, sorry, Renatinha. It's Renatinha here. I thought of Gisele. Okay, and I contrasted my data with Makosu Kulu. Makosu Kulu is a student from Angola who's currently a student at University of Southern Bahia. and for words that he can recognize. And of course, he doesn't recognize Pilunga in current Congo. Congo is with K, not this is wrong, not Creole, it's K. Congo, it's wrong here. So he says, I see Pilungas coming from Jindongo because of its ended form. Ungo and Unga, for him, seem to be words in Congo we usually use in Angola. And his perception go around that some words used in southern Bahia are similar and equal to words we use in Angola. It's marimbondo. Marimbondo, for example, he talks about. So in drawing conclusions, my conclusions go to analyze with you and probably have to hear from you about your perspectives on how we could address this. I'm not speaking from the context of sociolinguistics in the US, that you have some fields that communicate with sociolinguistics, such as the case of ethnographic words or racial linguistics, linguistic anthropology, sociology of language, and so on. But of course, I'm speaking about sociolinguistics in Brazil. This is to say, sociolinguistics in Brazil is more attained to the way it has to attempt to define a national language, what continues to frame it without considering reinvention of language by Black communities. It's the case of Angola, youth, or in the US or elsewhere. We should consider whether we don't have previous, or as we had slavery and incarceration and mass incarceration and genocide, we cannot say that we have the privilege of being affirmed in terms of legitimacy. It's what sociologist, Portuguese sociologist Boaventura de Souza Santos calls terms epistemicide, comes from epistemic and epistemicide. Epistemicide seems to be used to analyze how we can call this kind of attempt from sociolinguistics in Brazil. So they go to check, they try to check whether this community can be cataloged by in terms of legitimacy. Pretoguese is a technology, not a norm, where a set of aspects dwell in. So it's not a norm or a set of rules. It's the way we can use. I'm here now speaking Pretoguese. I'm here now speaking from our community. Perhaps some sounds that I know in English, that I have mastery. This word that comes from master of slaves or etc. But now I'm using this with the mastery from our own position in my own community. So it's different from a class where I'm teaching. I'm talking to you. For so long, I tried to do like our singer Anita, who was led by classes where she should emphasize American accent so that she go to the way of mainstream the US. So I'm not here for mainstream. I'm here to talk to you. And I know you can talk to me. So it derives from my own position as a scholar. And I'm speaking here at the same time Portuguese and English. So reinvention of languages by Black communities should then be considered in language studies, because this concept comes to make us know what is reinvention, not through the lens of a search for legitimacy, but the way you could say of our people to reinvent their languages. So this is the Brazilian Portuguese versus Portuguese I was planning to show. And I would like to say thanks to our organizing committee, because it's very important to me to be here with you. It was a concern that I could not have the opportunity, that I couldn't travel to the US, but I'll be always in the US with you, even with the end of this pandemic pandemic situation that we don't have how to travel. You can count on me for online, but also in person, please. I want to come to the US, so please, you can count on me. So thank you very much, colleagues, for this kind invitation. I'm so happy, I'm so thrilled that I can talk to my audience in the US, a country that I talk too much, so much. Many thanks. Thanks so much for this invitation.
Thank you, Gabriel. We have some time for questions and discussion. So if you have a question, you can raise your Zoom hand, or we can take questions in the chat. And there is a question in the chat from, looks like Stephen, but I am not able to read it, maybe, or if you can see it, or don't say if you can jump in.
Yeah, I can. Muito obrigado. Thank you for a very interesting talk. In the beginning of your discussion, you mentioned the limitations of conceptualizing of, by conventional academia of the issue of literacy, especially with respect to communities they are considered, low income or marginalized communities, right? The sense of literacy. Can you talk more about the concept of literacy and to what extent your argument of Mignolo in torno do border thinking in terms of...
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Tonze, for reading it. Yes, a good question, Stephen. Thank you so much for asking it in Portuguese. It's very caring from you, so thank you so much. Yes, conventional in the way sociolinguistics and linguistics, specifically in Brazil, look at those communities, say about some policies that we bring from international agencies and we implement in our country. So the concept around literacy, for example, is a bit problematic and controversial when we look at the way it's applied to analyze some countries who are illiteracy countries, like it's Brazil or in Latin American or in African countries, because the concept of literacy is attained or tied to colonial borders that think of literacy like reading the alphabet, reading the text through the alphabet. So it devotes much time to say what is the language, who can read and who cannot read. And of course, I see we have concerns about people who can read, because we are surviving a society of modern entanglements, and I need my student to take a bus, for example, as I could take a bus in the US or take a train or take a metro, and could go to a train station or could talk to staff from a restaurant. And of course, what I don't see here is the way it's framed to not consider what people have in terms of their own languages and readings. What Dumblemeyer calls grassroots literacies. I think this is very important to look at grassroots, because grassroots sometimes talks about the right to speak. So the right to speak, the language rights in general, but they're also about some colonial borders, as you implied in your, as you say in your question. So border thinking is to think that way. I need to teach my students how to get a bus or get a train or go to a train station. But sometimes it's colonial when I'm speaking about you should without explaining the way it's colonial. So I sometimes say we couldn't tell our students bad truths, because that are truths. They're wrong, they're colonial. So I could say you really have to study, but you don't have to study hard like someone who's going to face this like a global truth. This is to be explicated in terms of the situation you are dealing with. Thanks so much for your question. I'm so glad that Stephen could talk in Portuguese. This is very good from Americans. I found very familiar in the US, so that many people would like to speak in Portuguese, and they would like to hear from a Baiano speaking Portuguese. I don't know if Larissa is Baiana too, but I think Tom Zé has some experiences to tell about that. So thanks so much for your question in Portuguese. I'm very glad.
We're nearing the end, but I think if there are more questions, we can maybe take one more question from the audience.
I think I can ask. So thank you, Gabriel, for your presentation. It was fascinating to learn from you. And by the way, I'm from Curitiba. I'm from the South. So, well, I was thinking while you were giving your talk that there is an erasure of the Black culture in Brazil, especially in Paraná. Right. And then I remember that I wrote a paper trying to draw some comparisons between African American English and the Portuguese vernacular. Hold on, because I was vernacular Brazilian Portuguese. And then I just found that some similarities because I found that both of them have the W negation, the S absence, and the way they mark the plurality only in the determiner is also quite similar. And then I was talking to a friend who is from Curitiba about the fact that we can say os carro. So, and then she told me that it was like an Italian presence, actually an Italian influence. And so I like to ask, like, do you feel that other European cultures, besides the Portuguese one, of course, that we were mainly influenced by them, but do you feel that they are more valued than the African presence in terms of language?
I like a question very much. I appreciate it because I'm trying to say this to the extent we should make comparisons, of course, but origins come with generic solutions for some inquiries we should have. For example, local communities could speak because they had their ancestors. And it was, of course, an entanglement of factors, but it prevails from the consistency of how a Black community can have this used by their ancestors in Brazil specifically. Of course, I know that it can be common, but I don't know any example from Italian language, from only Portuguese language from Portugal, Portuguese language from Portugal. And I would see this rather tentative to explain that we face a bias when Lélia Gonzalez, our sister, our elder, Lélia Gonzalez analyzed the way Brazilians spoke Portuguese with the use of as menina or Flamengo. And it's about embodiment. So I'm handling this because embodiment means that you are locally engaged, and sometimes you only you're about to repeat or to speak what is common to your ancestors' speak communities. So this is very common in Brazil, where we can have influences coming from Europe. Of course, I'm not here denying the prominence or the existence of Portuguese or some other languages in Brazil, but the fact is that the aspects Black communities say in Brazil come from African ways of speaking. I don't know if you got me. This is the way Black communities are not those to repeat, but they're also to frame. They also have a wake on how they can create in language in Brazilian Portuguese. So Pretoguese is our heart. For example, I was invited as a guest speaker to the university, to be a speaker at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And I was primarily welcomed by Professor Ujuania, who was professor at Penn State University. And now she's, I think, now she's not at UPenn or nor UPenn, neither Penn State, but I think it's, I don't know the university now, I can remember. But she began to speak Portuguese with me in the beginning of the lecture, and we were in three, me, Professor Ujo, and a colleague, a very good colleague from the University of she was my hostess from the University of California, Santa Barbara. And she said surprisingly, "Oh, you speak Portuguese the same way. You speak very similar." So Ujuania was speaking English, Black African American. Sometimes I try to say Black African, no, African American, because in Portuguese in Brazil we don't say African Brazilian, but in the US you say African American. Speaking Portuguese was the same I was doing, but why? And she said, because you speak Portuguese with your bodies. And I commented on how we can speak a language without our bodies. So that's so hard. We speak with our bodies. White communities speak with their bodies, but they deny the way they have bodies. They have bodies and they have different ancestors. Whiteness is not the same pathway now and the pathway in colonial times. It was framed. So it was difficult to understand that we don't have the same whiteness. We have now a whiteness in danger, at stake, facing difficulties and trying to exist with their white color. So it's a case for analyzing how we are embracing concepts and conceptualization on how we try to be homogeneous. So thank you, Larissa, for your question. Your face looks like Brazilian, but also from Bahia, as we know, like Tonzé. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, and thank you to our audience. We do have to wrap things up, but I wanted to ask Gabriel if you can leave an email in the chat, because a few people have more questions and they want to keep talking with you. And so I thought perhaps they could reach out directly to engage you more on the topic, since there's a lot of interest still.